And I teach here. I'm going to chair this panel along with Amogh, who sits on my right, who's also a faculty here in IHS. Bangalore, a few years ago, there was this article in Outlook saying how Bangalore is the hotspot of researchers. That's not the reason why we have the panel, but the idea that you can also study urban by actually engaging deeply in a city from wide range of perspectives, and that's one of the way in which we want to begin this, and that's why the first panel that we have on this. We have a exciting range of panel presenters, some old friends, some new people that we will meet. The first, Yamini Krishnan from English and Foreign Language University, Hyderabad, who has a paper along with Prashant Shankaran. Then Arzu Mistry from Srishti, Salila from RV College, Shweta from IHS and the Bartlett Development Planning Unit, and Svetlana Ristova from Institute for Culture and Society. She is not here. Yes. So the format of this is going to be 15 minutes presentation, and when the speaker takes up, please introduce yourself, and 5 minutes for first round of questions and immediate response, and then we will have 20 minutes at the end. So please reserve your more questions, thoughts, etc. Yeah? Is there anything else, Amogh, you want to add?
No, that's about it, I think. Thank you.
Super cool. So let's have Yamini and Prashant.
Good morning. My name is Prashant. I don't know how to give a background, but I've been in corporate sector for about 25 years, stepped off, and about last 6 years, I've been mainly doing voluntary work in the cusp of entrepreneurship, arts, and some social sector. Little bit of context about our paper and presentation, and then I will hand over to Yamini to do the actual presentation of the paper. This is for us, in a way, homecoming, because in 2013, I think we did a workshop here in IIHS called Opacity with Vani Subramaniam. And, very enriching kind of a work, and at the end of it, we had to do our own individual installations. So all of us did our own installations, and the one which I did had, as part of the workshop, we had walked around, and I also take photographs, so incorporating that. And after that, we had some discussions, and we really walked around the city, and one thing which caught our eye was the graffiti in various places. So we documented graffiti in a very detailed extent in Bangalore. And that led to us getting very interested in that topic. We did a lot of research of graffiti, how it originated in the US. At the end of all that emerged our paper, which is what we will try and present today. So I think for us it is a full circle coming back here, because this is where it actually originated. Over to you, Yamini.
Yeah, so introducing, I'm Yamini. I work as a PhD. I'm doing my PhD from English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. So he's given a brief context of where this work comes from. So the method was while I was living in Bangalore.
Can you just hold it a little closer?
Okay, I was living in Bangalore for some time, and I used to walk around the city, and that was a part of my everyday life, and so that was something which contributed to this paper deeply. So getting to the paper itself. So I'll start with the definitions of graffiti and street art, which we will keep questioning and keep adding to as we go along with the paper. That is graffiti. Lushan, he defines graffiti as any form of unofficial, unsanctioned application of medium on the surface. So the importance on unofficial and unsanctioned is to be noted. And street art, it's not the same as graffiti. It sort of takes a different trajectory. It also is different in terms of the way it engages with the city. Street art is, as defined by Armstrong, is unsolicited art that is somehow unattached to the surface or placed in public view, either by artists themselves or by someone supportive of their cause or project. street art is not about taking space, but rather about repurposing space. Because this coming, I'll elaborate on this as I take you through the historical roots of graffiti across the world. I'm taking this as a base on which we will understand how we read the walls of Bangalore, placing it in the context. It's important to understand what are all the discourses around graffiti that has happened, so that we can locate ourselves somewhere. So graffiti and street art have been spoken about of in mostly it's been discussed in the U.S., Europe, and Australian context, and these are all the different aspects which have been discussed. That is graffiti as a territorial marker, as an occupation of space, particularly in the context of the black graffiti, which was prominent in the 1970s in the U.S., and as a move against gentrification of the neighborhoods, as a community activities. There's been a lot of research on how graffiti helps building communities, how there is a sort of apprenticeship that happens among graffiti makers, and what is the sort of community formation that happens among those who engage in graffiti and street art as an urban art form, which sort of provides a relief from the a very purposefulness of the urban form itself. And in the context of art, it has been discussed as anti-art, and it's extra, that is, as a public art, it is outside the walls of the museum. So it questions the idea of who defines what an art is, and the aspects of who is art accessible to. So the lot of street art movement has been in the context of making art available to the people on the streets, rather those who cannot enter the walls of the museum. And it's been a lot of street artists and graffiti makers have, again in the Western context, have often said that they're anti-advertising, because advertising occupies space, the urban space. It is about consumerism, it is about the ideals of the city itself in which we live. So graffiti is very anti-advertising as advocated by the graffiti and street art makers. So again, the historical context, that is US, 1970 US against gentrification. These are just broad movements. It's not that it's properly theorized as these watertight compartments of this, it starts here and ends there, but rather just the contextualization. So it takes a form of activist graffiti. And post-2000 is a global movement which has been influenced by the internet, that is widely documented, and there are these communities online which are constantly sharing their work and constantly engaging. So there is also an extended audience which graffiti receives on the internet. But there are also questions of, when we're talking about art, bringing art to the streets, it's again going digital also. So there's this conflict which is constantly there, which one has to be aware of. My paper here, characterizing the city of Bangalore. So the invention of the city as a global city, as an IT capital in the 90s. No, it's okay. The state agenda to turn Bangalore into Singapore. And I'll also discuss, I'm talking here about Janaki Nayar's characterization of Bangalore and how it's been made into a global city and the political, social context of it. She talks about the Bangalore Agenda Task Force, which was set up in the 1999. And so I'll just read parts of the paper from here. So, what happened?
Go on.
Meanwhile, you can read so that you...
Yeah, okay.
It's back.
So, so internationalization of monetary flows led to the development of corporate cities which compete for global capital. Janaki Nayar traces the journey of Bangalore, and she notes that the shift of the city, nature of the city from the 1970s to the 1990s. In the 70s, Bangalore was imagined around the public sector worker, and later around the NRI and the IT worker. She points out that Bangalore has been jettisoned into the metropolitan status in less than 3 decades of time. And she notes that the shift in the vision of Bangalore, with the intention to turn Bangalore into the new Singapore. The nature of governance also underwent a significant change. The Bangalore Agenda Task Force, set up in 1999, was to make Bangalore future ready. The plans for the future development of the city were made by the stakeholders, majorly corporates. The BATF was headed by the CEO of the Infosys and so on. The incorporation of the stakeholder parlance, which is in the realm of corporate management, was a signifier to the several structural changes which happened later on. And she also notes that the citizenship in this context is made coterminous with the consumer rights in the state as a service provider, with organizations like BATF negotiating the transaction. She argues that the rhetoric of beautification of the city finds easy targets in the lower classes. Beauty, almost coterminous, becomes synonymous with the middle class aesthetics. The citizens' initiatives led by the middle class attempt to sanitize public spaces to rid them of the unwanted. With this context, we will go through what are all the different, to start with, I'll try, as already spoken about, the importance of the unsolicited and uncommissioned work versus what has been commissioned. So this is the basic framework we take to divide the readings which we see in Bangalore on the streets, so that we can later understand the politics of it. So based on the sanction ownership, the writings can be broadly divided into commissioned writings and art, and unclaimed writings and art. The division is that there are certain like for example, an advertisement or a political rally writing on the wall is also writing on the wall, but it has clear agenda to it that we've categorized as commissioned writings, whereas unclaimed writings is you don't have any marker of where it comes from or what the intention is. Though, I mean, the intention could be clear, but you don't have a person or an organization taking credit for it. So that's the way we basically, again, it's not a proper watertight compartment, there are overlaps, but this helps us understand the nature of public spaces. So I'll just take you through the different photographs. So this is political writings. Again, there's a clear marker of who it belongs to. And this is graffiti for social offline. I mean, people of Bangalore might be aware. So use of graffiti as a way of promotion of that space. And art of BBMP, which we find all over the place. So this is the agenda of BBMP, which says that the beautification, this is the BBMP commissioner, the beautification exercise will have different themes in schools and colleges, which have special focus on patriotic messages. And this, the way this the BBMP art drive was executed was it was a contract given with 25 rupees per square feet paid to the artist. Again, we need to interrogate the question of who an artist is. Should we call it a craftsman or an artist, or what is this? So then we have several non-governmental organizations. Really say who's written, but still they are writing. So, and there's based on the approach to the way walls have been occupied. Another one is the involvement of NGOs and other organizations which are set in the space, graffiti and street art for the promotion of tourism, because now these are also documented online and there is a clear ownership of who's painted which wall. There are international artists who participate in this, and there is a, like the website clearly says it's my work on this wall. So it is just art instead of inside the museum. It's taken, it's not, again, I don't know if we can call it as democratization of art, because it's done through a particular agency, and these are international artists. It's not me and you who's going and painting the walls, but I already have a reputation of an artist. And so what can we think about public spaces through this entry point? See.
17 seconds extra. Yeah. Amogh is keeping the time. So we have 5 minutes. Questions, answer, and then we can pick it up at the later phase. So. Anyone? GB.
Hi. Hey. So my name is Gautam. The question that I wanted to ask you is if you see a pattern between the content landscapes of work that's commissioned and funded versus not. Because I think sometimes we can make a very easy one-to-one relationship that individual work is activist work and sponsored or funded or invited work is not. But the Delhi case, especially when you look at street art, which comes from there, actually mixes those lines very powerfully. And there's a lot of very powerful political work that is invited and commissioned, sometimes goes into tension after the invitation. And so that, I also think that the act of invitation and funding is not a one-time event, right? It can open up a political negotiation that can be subverted, refused, contracts break, fights happen. So can you just talk a little bit more about the patterns of content, autonomy, art, and support?
Can you take 2 more questions? Yeah. Lalita and then, sorry.
I wanted to ask you actually to talk a little bit more about this idea of unclaimed art, and maybe talk about what fits in that. You showed us 1 or 2, but maybe sort of at a larger level of the content, the kind of, and the reason I'm asking is because in some sense this seems to militate against the way in which art has increasingly become commodified, that you have to have an author and value is based also to a large extent subjectively. This is an up and coming, this is an established, and then, so this whole idea of actually unclaimed, how does that work? And going forward, I'm just wondering, do you see this actually being built incrementally? Is there even that possibility? So in that sense, you also have this sort of maybe an idea of a collaborative process, or I don't know, see this as commons. I'm just wondering if you're thinking in that direction at all based on what you have studied.
The gentleman over there.
I'm Pradeep. My question is the other side of what Gautam just said. In spite of being activist individuals, a group of people working in one, I'm not much familiar with Bangalore, Delhi I know. How come I'm seeing a lot of work in Delhi which has got no political context in connection to the location. You are doing street art in a place like Shahpur Jat, which is full of migrant laborers. I don't see anything. I see nice things and all. How is it happening? I mean, I don't get it.
If you can just respond to those questions, and if we have time, we'll take a second round. Otherwise, we can reserve your questions for the end of the session. Thank you.
Yeah, to start with, content autonomy and art, whether institutionalization has always to be looked at as something negative. They could also be something which is political. But from whatever we've seen in Bangalore, I mean, I'm not aware of the Delhi context, but also coming from somebody, I happen to attend another workshop, I mean another presentation where the Delhi context was also being discussed. So I'll bring in some, it was by Sanchita Dasgupta of JNU. She's working on graffiti in Delhi. So I'll bring in some points which she was mentioning there. So she talks about how, exactly, I'll try to answer both the questions of Delhi at a go. And she says that, she talks specifically about the street art as an organization, which also happens in Delhi, which she notes that it was all about some fancy designs, and there's lack of context in whatever happens through these institutional mode of producing street art. And she also notes that it's very it's because these are places and spots which are being given in the sense that the state gives you where to paint. So there is a politics to the selection of the space. So like he was, I mean, coming back to Bangalore here, like when there's it is in a particular slum where you think that it is needed to be painted, whereas, for example, I don't see anything in Sadashiv Nagar, or like say the lanes of Sadashiv Nagar. But yes, there is, if you go to Shivaji Nagar, there is. So, and also it is not in the context of, for example, the question of art and adapting to the context itself. If there's even an intention to engage with the community, there could be. Everything institutional need not be always looked at with a negative intent, but these are a talk down which happens through this art. So in the sense that there is no engagement with the community, rather the way the art is rendered. I'm not getting into the aesthetics of it, but just when you read those, it is, does it even make sense to the people who are living there, or is it just something I'm just looking at it because it's there? So it's more the adaptation which is to happen to the context is lacking, is what we noticed.
Just to add to that, and also overlapping to the next question, is also, we found also in Bangalore very fragmented, but the underlying theme of graffiti also being a personal form of expression. Forget about a communal message or a social message or an activist message. And that is, in many places, that is visible as a pure, simple self-expression. And like I also documented a lot of graffiti in Goa, for example. In Goa, a lot of that is there. So there is no real, activism or communal coloring or even a political context to it, but it's a self-given example. And where the trending of it in terms of institutionalizing also being political, and that is across art forms. For example, even if it is theater or even if it is this thing, there are movements which are institutionalized but also have activist elements or whatever, and so also in street art in that fashion. And
there's another question of do we see it as how do we see it in the future? I mean, that's a question. I think I don't know if I can be speculative in that sense. But what I see is that, can there be partnerships? There are already like you see the street art thing. It's a partnership of several organizations, but it's only it has a clear class dimension to it in terms of the way it engages with the city. Whether there can be interclass partnership or a diverse kind of partnership is something. I'm very skeptical about, but I really hope that it happens. So.
And that is interesting because we found one of the thoughts that we had was, unlike how it the origination of graffiti in terms of a oppressed voice of people who want to reclaim their space and things like that, here it has almost become an elite aspirational expression in some quarters. So it is economically better to do, and the expression of that is using that kind of vocabulary and that kind of language, and that becomes an in thing or a cool thing sometimes to be associated with. And some of even the corporates have used that appropriation to sort of get attention and eyeballs from a particular group of people who, end of the day, would become their end customers or people they want to have a dialogue with or engage with.
Okay, sorry, are you done? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm afraid we're like a little bit over time, so if you can just reserve your questions for the end of the session, we'll bring them up again. Yeah. So next we have Arzu Mistry from the Srishti Institute of Art, Design and Technology.
We can keep this here, Amogh, and you can use it when you want.
No, I'm done.
You have a step.
Arzu Mistry, and I, along with Amitabh here and other colleagues at Srishti, run a project called Art in Transit. And I want to thank Yamini and Prashant because they've really set us up to deepen the dialogue, and I really look forward to that today. I'm going to position Art in Transit from a pedagogic point of view, because as mentioned by Yamini and Prashant, there is a movement in place. There is a street art movement in place, and that's one part of a much larger public art discourse. And what is it that we do as we position ourselves as institutions within this space that are thinking about this practice? And how do we position ourselves as practitioners, and what questions arise from practice that allow for research to happen? So that's kind of the trajectory that I'm going to take. Art in Transit is a project that includes students, visiting artists, faculty, and we've been working in the city of Bangalore with the BBMP, with the horticultural department, in their spaces, I would say, and the metro as well. So I'm going to actually start with a little bit of framing. I want to start with this quote by Solomon Benjamin from the article, The Aesthetics of a Ground-Up City. Rather than assume that the city must have a common aesthetic bound by a singular history or trajectory, we need to consider them as territories of multiple hues. In doing so, we embark on considering a more anarchic politics of the city. The politics is shaped in complex dialectic ways by the meta processes, but also by diverse levels of structural effect and appropriation. In this perspective, there is no one aesthetic, nor is it static in some kind of predictive way, and this represents the heterogenization of the terrain of what we call the city. I share two pieces of work that are really about this idea of, I think, diverse views, but also a process of that diversity, which I really am going to frame here as layers. So as part of the street art festival that happened here in Bangalore in October, an artist from the Netherlands, Dan Bottleck, painted this wall that many of you might have passed on your way here from around on Palace grounds. And this wall had Krishnaraja Wadiyar about maybe 2 years ago, and then it got painted with blue and white stripes. And this artist from the Netherlands has come and responded to that by what he calls a system of almost erasure. And he calls it background subtraction. So there's a response to sight in a certain way, but also an articulation of layers here. This is a work in progress at the Cubbon Park metro station of a student, Aishwarya Kumar, who is taking a slice of what was there. So here she's taking a slice of something that you access through the Cubbon Park metro station near Commercial Street, Narayan Pillai Street, where she's looking at these layers of the old and what gets put on top of that over and over and over again. And she's trying to explore that through also talking about a particular population that within the context of the city, Narayan Pillai Street is based on the Tamil migration into the city of Bangalore. And that is not something that you can really put out in public space when you're talking about Tamil migration into the city. So how do you use the arts to just basically uncover and layer a certain understanding in a particular place? So the Art in Transit project as a pedagogic project, I just want to situate it. We moved into the Peenya metro station in 2014 and just set up a studio there to see what would happen, what might emerge from setting up a studio in not a public space but a semi-public space. The metro is a semi-public space. You have to go through security to get in. We want to frame it within a certain framework. So critical pedagogy, the idea of relevant education to a group of people. Here it is the middle class because we're talking about a private institution. So what becomes relevant to them? That is emergent from one's context and place. So an education that comes from context, comes from place, and builds connection to understanding of systems of power. How do we engage in a place to understand through the critical pedagogy of place? How does place function as text? So the understanding of the interconnections of complex social, political, historical, and environmental relationships that play that are at play in a particular place. And I want to position here that is seen from a social science view as a critical understanding of place. But for us as artists, we also have to shut that critical off a lot of times, or figure out a way to engage with it where it doesn't overpower some of the ways that we want to engage with art practice. And so we look at the creative pedagogy of place. How do we engage with a place where we are able to silence that critical part in conjunction or engage it in conversation that is not overpowering by a sense of helplessness or a sense of overwhelm by a certain situation. Also, the idea, framing this here within a context of public pedagogy, the fact that we all, young, old, rich, poor, learn from the public sphere. We learn about what is valued in our city from the public sphere. We learn from visual information. We learn from the media. So this is where people are learning all the time, but learning outside of the context of an institution. So what are people learning from public space? And what are then we as people who are engaging in public art practice responsible for, or really, what is that realm that we're framing? And then the idea of affect, the fact that the arts are a way for people to make meaning, and there is a non-cognitive aspect which allows for the arts to touch one's feelings or emotions, and that becomes then something that we have to really know and understand how we are engaging with. So just wanted to position this as to what happened when we moved into the station. We set it up as a site for study, and we started just working and practicing within that space. Here are two installations, and these are at the Cubbon Park metro station, and this just shares a little bit of this critical creative dynamic. So on the left-hand side is an installation called Whose Weather Is It Anyway? And it's by an artist named Sharat Chandra, who's comparing weather data between San Francisco and Bangalore as a way to position that both these spaces are spaces for innovation because of their good weather. So he's making a very kind of simplistic link that way, but he's bringing in all of this data that one is questionable whether it's legal or illegal, and playing them in relationship to each other. Behind him is a student installation, which is all these lights, where this same student is looking at the idea of how do we experience light above ground, and then what happens when we're underground? How do we experience light underground? And this is really the sun, the engagement of the sun with the clouds. So it's a much more atmospheric relationship and not so critical in its framing. When we moved into the Peenya metro station, students spent 6 months just responding through practice and researching space. They started creating interventions that were just a response to space, interventions that were in connection to the people at the metro station, drawing the guards on the walls of the metro station, picking up pieces of scrap, making musical instruments, working on the floor with scrap materials that were found in the metro scrapyard, understanding the space, understanding why people don't use the Peenya metro station, and mapping the space to understand people's relationship to that location. But really, in essence, moving in to develop a practice around place. I think that some of the points that were raised in the previous paper, I just want to actually deepen some of these ideas, because this does not sit against a background that is, it's in conversation and in dialogue, as you guys mentioned, with the rest of the world. But we're also engaging in a different kind of practice here. So how does the conversation that's going on in the rest of the world affect us? So here are a couple of different ideas that I just want to put forth. One is the idea of worlding. One way to think about worlding is this push against the world-class, or push for the world-class city. But I actually want to move beyond kind of a dichotomous meta-narrative that just pushes, IT versus non-IT, that kind of push, but move to a more heterogeneous practice of worlding as situated in everyday practices that are creatively shaping an alternative social vision. So the idea that there may be many visions for this city that is going through, and many worlds that are creating those visions in practice, each person's practice. The second idea that I want to position, and this came up again in the previous article, but not necessarily so intricately linked, is the idea of gentrification. Now, gentrification is a move towards middle-class aesthetics, but there's something more that's happening. Why is this idea perpetuating? And this author, who's written this book called The Gentrification of the Mind, positions that it is in our psyche to homogenize and move away from difference, and the psyche, here she's talking about New York, she's talking about young people coming back into the city after living in the suburbs and wanting the city to look like the suburbs. In our context, we have people working on big IT campuses and wanting their neighborhoods to look like IT campuses. So this becomes something that's persistent, but it's also in us. It's also in our students. It's also in the youth I work with in Baipnahalli slum. It's in everybody's head. And so how do we counter it? Becomes an interesting idea. I think the other thing, and that often is the elephant in the room when art in transit starts to talk, is the fact that infrastructure is our new form of power. And whether we are looking at skylines, or we're looking at credit cards, or we're looking at roads within the context of the city, these are these new forms of power, and how do we engage with that? And of course, the fact that Asian cities right now are in the spotlight, and everybody's looking at these Asian cities. And what becomes of, this was a big exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts last year of artists, very famous Indian artists, but also artists all from the East, looking at cities and developing artworks that are about these mega cities. If these are becoming and placing themselves within the hallowed walls of galleries, what becomes of public art practice? How do we respond to that? These are interesting frames for us. So we worked with a lot of different groups, but today I'm going to talk really about our work with the Metro. And there's two reasons for working with the Metro for us. One is that it is a point in place. Unlike a flyover that goes through the city, this Metro has stations, and those stations are a point on a map. They allow for a community around them, and this becomes a critical reason for us to work with the Metro. The second is that they are a complex middle ground. The Metro is complicit in environmental damage in the city, of displacement of communities, but it is also a necessary public transportation system. That in itself is contested by many, but it is ripe with contradictions. So how do we, as a pedagogic process, situate ourselves within the contradictions and engage with them? These are, just a series of images, and I'm going to go very quickly. The kind of lighting is a little odd, but this is a public space furniture piece for people to sit, and this actually brings up for me that we have students from many different disciplines that work with this project. We have public space design students, we have furniture design students, we have digital media art students, we have contemporary art practice students, we have visual communication students. They're all working in different ways, people who are working with performance. This is actually an info installation of the colors of Pina, and it is based on a series of 100 photographs that were taken and the statistics that came up from those 100 photographs that was created as an installation. Here are two installations that are at Cubbon Park Station right now. This one is of a series of trees that have been killed or chopped down, and you can Google locate them on with a QR code that's under each of the images. And this one is very simply, again, another kind of infographic, 1973 to 2016. You walk from this side, you see a whole range of trees. When you cross over, you just see buildings. So very, very simplistic in that way. I'm going to actually skip this, but frame for you two other things that we are contending with. So as a curatorial frame, we engaged with these ideas that came up for us from our practice. The tensions of aesthetics and aspiration in this city, the idea of the network, systems that exist, how are we conscious of those systems, how do we engage with those systems, what happens to the individual within those systems, so the traveler, and the other land, the ability with these stations that they are almost other land-like. They are these alien forms. Cubbon Park is our first experience of the underground in a city that's on granite. So how do we engage with the other land in this creative way? Also the idea of the alternative that comes from that framing. I will frame these as spaces that have arisen for us as tensions that we then use to read our work and allow for ourselves to critique our own practice, but also further our own practice. Do we sit on these continua, or do we form a third point of these continua? And these are place and practice. Artists working in relationship to place or imposing practice on place. This came up. I'll just finish this slide. Activism and gentrification, polarizing positions of activism and the homogenizing forces of gentrification. Where do we sit on this? Local and global, influences and oppressions of global movements and emergent and traditional local practices. Ephemeral and archival practices. Permanent works versus layered temporary installations, the tensions of working with government agencies and funders who are not used to supporting the arts. Value and impact, the value of our work to a community or the impact of the work on the city. So I'm going to actually leave it at this slide because it allows for us to, maybe through the questions, also talk about some of the examples. Okay.
Thank you, Artu. So, this is working? Yeah, thank you very much. 5 minutes. No?
Yeah, we can take 3 questions again, if anybody has questions.
Hello, hi. So I wanted to give an example from Bombay and then ask a question. Hi, my name is Radhika. I work on a project with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So in Bombay, there was a metro station that displaced the street on the ground. So it displayed street hawkers and food hawkers, etc. And when the metro station was built, the art in that metro station was of street food. So it had the chai glass and the vada pav, etc. And this was really beautifully done, and there was a lot of artists who worked with it. So my question really was whether art such as this can be used as a pacification tool or allow for the forgetting of the struggles that actually happened on ground when the metro station was built. So can art then also be a tool for depoliticization of these marginalizations or evictions or struggles?
Any more questions? This one at the back. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I completely understand what you're saying, that you're sitting at the crossroads of various kinds of debates, and it's a very difficult position, and that you're trying to be extremely self-critical and extremely self-reflective. But I'm just also wondering when you are looking at the city as a whole, and just as Radhika said from Bombay, some of these places that you find art in have been highly contested. And also I'm asking, in the making of art of a certain kind, which stems from an aesthetic that students are schooled in and so on, which reflect also worlding practices in art. So then are you also creating, when I don't mean you personally, but is this process really creating a new kind of aesthetic of place itself and creating new meanings around place which erase even larger histories, not even the immediate struggles that Radhika was speaking about?
We have time for one more question, sir.
Well, that was Usha Rao, anthropologist, artist from Bangalore. And if you could introduce, please.
I'm Balaji Mohan. I'm an urban designer and an architect. I work in Delhi. Thank you for your presentation. My questions are, all the work you presented are in some sort of a metropolitan or urban context in a metro station. I just wanted to ask whether you've done any work in a much smaller town or a much smaller city, because of how the people react to art in these towns or cities or second-tier cities tend to vary, and the way you engage with them also has a difference. So I just wanted to ask if you've done something there, or what is your experience in that kind of a context. Thanks.
So if you could just respond to those three.
So I'm actually going to, I think that the points that you bring up are part of the tensions that we're engaging with when we talk about place and practice. I think the points that you bring up, both of you, whether art is used as a pacification tool or the idea of these new meanings that art brings to space, and this idea of erasure almost. And I wonder, these sit within our tensions of place and practice. And one of the things that we have started to do in order to be able to push our own boundaries of where this conversation goes. So this is answering, not answering, but our attempt and our position in that way, is along with student projects that go, and they're long-term projects, some of them are 6 months, some of them are 5 weeks. We've also been engaging with these short-term events that we open up to a whole range of city-based artists. So we had one in October that was the Festival of Stories, and it was a very contested space because we had Street Art India as one collaborative, and we had other collaborations that were completely against that kind of aesthetic of the city. But it was in our attempt to open up this idea of multiple visions, and we had 75 external artists plus 150 students and students from many different colleges that were engaging in that dialogue. So that's kind of one. I don't know the answer to your question, but this is the idea that we are trying to engage with in terms of opening up this practice and through these set of events. The other is actually, I'm going to frame some of the work that's happening now almost, I wouldn't say, I mean, it's about taking those conversations further. So if you talk about what was there and what is there before, there are a couple of artists here, Yash and Runjan, who are working with a group of students and artists in the Dhanvantri underpass, where you have these old BBMP paintings, and they're working with this active erasure almost in conversation with the BBMP engineers who want to whitewash these walls, and saying don't whitewash them, leave parts of them, let's work and layer on top of them. So there is this idea of a certain kind of layering that is not about the cleaning up of space and then putting something else on top of it, and it's opening up a new conversation, I think, amongst artists themselves about how do we layer, and in what ways do we layer without erasing, and just acknowledging that erasing through the art practice.
Thank you so much.
Do you have more time? No?
No, we are over time.
Amazing. So next we will have Salila.
Yep.
Great.
I'm going to be sitting and presenting. Do I need mic?
Yeah, there is a mic. Mic.
Oh, mic.
You just have to start off.
Okay. Good morning. I'm Salila Vanka. I teach at RV College of Architecture, Bangalore, and I have a doctoral degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And today's presentation, my paper titled Public Space and Public Life in an Indian City, Notes on an Indian City in Transition, is based on my dissertation research from my time in Michigan. So my research embarked on the premise, kind of, can you see? Okay, that's where I can't see.
Yeah, it's working.
So my research embarked on the premise that the politics of public space reflects the politics of planning and governance in Indian cities. And what I found, which I'll proceed to kind of explain in the rest of my presentation, is that local contestations for public space in Bangalore emerge as struggles for inclusion in the city, irrespective of different socio-economic groups, whichever group they belong to. And in the process, they force centralized planning processes to engage with the local in governance and planning. Before I proceed further, I'll just briefly lay out a roadmap for the rest of my presentation. I start off with a theoretical background to the research, and then I introduce Bangalore very briefly. So I think most of us are familiar with the city in any case. And then I talk about the various public spaces in Bangalore, and then the research question that emerges from this brief theoretical underpinnings that I examine. Then the framework that I used to make my own study, the case studies that I used, and finally my conclusions. So a brief background to the study itself. The study occurred in the backdrop of accelerated urbanization that we are all quite aware of in Indian cities, and a simultaneous centralization of planning in terms of massive, huge infrastructure projects that are being undertaken by central governments and special purpose vehicles that they've created for those purposes. And so that has kind of cast a tremendous pressure on the public arena or public realm of every Indian city, major Indian city. And beyond that, there's also this simultaneous emphasis, or since the 1990s, the central government has talked about the dissemination or devolution of local governance powers. So local authorities were given more powers in terms of planning and managing planning functions for the city, and also there was this component of public participation that was to be increased at the local level. So there's this interesting contrast that emerges there, where there's more centralization of large projects that are being built, and then there's this devolution of power to local residents, where they're encouraged to, or they're supposedly allowed to participate more in local planning. So theoretical underpinnings to my study. So since basically my research discusses state, space, and society, so that was the planning literature that I was engaging with. So some of the existing scholarship talks about this dichotomous relationship, or basically the two kinds of society that are prevalent. That's civil society and political society. That is Partha Chatterjee's distinction that he makes. He calls civil society closed association of modern elite groups, walled up within enclaves of civic freedom and rational law, whereas political society are subaltern communities that transgress the strict lines of legality in struggling to live and work. So that's one point of from where I take off. And then there's the other idea of bourgeois environmentalism that Amita Bhaviskar talks about, and this is a very middle class idea where upper class concerns around aesthetics, leisure, safety, and health have come significantly to shape the disposition of urban spaces. So there's a certain way in which urban spaces are visualized by society as well as state actors. And finally, there's this overlapping of interests and aspirations of state actors as well as middle class residents of cities, which brings about a certain kind of imaginary of what the ideal city should be. And at the same time, there have been other studies too that have questioned these distinctions, and in terms of, they're not so black and white. So you have a little fuzziness, a bit of grayness. And for instance, Anjaria writes that citizens groups do not necessarily comprise an inexorable force sweeping the city. And Kamath and Vijay Bhaskar have also written about the variations within the urban middle class when they were studying RWAs and their engagement with the government in Bangalore itself. And there's, of course, Kumar talks about the middle class citizen as a political protester. And finally, this entire idea of the top-down planning being this dominant, oppressive kind of model by which the city is formed is questioned by Benjamin when he talks about, he urges people to look at cities as consisting of multiple contested territories inscribed by complex local histories. So that's where I take off with my own research. Bangalore quickly, Karnataka, and we're sitting right there. And the city itself grew exponentially in the past 2 decades and started off with the Pete, then you had the Pete and the cantonment, and then it was a military and trading town to start with in the 1600s. And then today what we have is this metro city and a mega city in the making, and that's about 741 square kilometers in size and growing. Those graphs just indicate the leaps and bounds with which the city has grown in terms of area as well as population. Some of the, when I talk about public spaces, this is what I mean for Bangalore. Bangalore has always had a very rich horticultural history, and there's been this culture of parks and gardens, which perhaps is kind of unparalleled in the country, or so I like to believe. And there's a lot of man-made lakes that have been there traditionally, and so of course we have these kinds of spaces. You have some indigenous spaces like the Katte on the top left. That's a village square where you always have people sitting around, of course. And then you have the markets, the street markets. Then you have natural resources like the lakes. And then you have parks during pre-colonial parks like colonial parks like Cubbon Park. And then you have the Lal Bagh, the botanical gardens. And the streets, of course, the tree-lined streets that abound in the city, and which are unfortunately reducing in number. Markets. As I already said, the Santes, the street markets and more traditional markets that every Indian city has, and the replacement of those. So the kind of issues that are happening to public space here is demolition of those kinds of markets and displacement of those markets and being replaced by more formal structures which don't really get occupied the way they're supposed to. People don't want to go above the ground floor because they're like, who's going to come and buy stuff from us on the second floor or the third floor? They need visibility. That's what makes these markets successful. And then you have road widening, which is still happening everywhere across the city with the metro project on. And this causes several issues, of course, loss of pedestrian space, loss of street economy space, and pollution and traffic, increase in traffic, etc. And parks and playgrounds, which are not a bad thing at all, who would argue against those? But then the way that parks and playgrounds are visualized by local authorities, they're fenced, they're gated, they have these rules that pretty much don't let you do anything except walk in there very passively, I guess. And so there's this certain imagery of a park that has that the government propagates, and that doesn't, and it's not a very inclusive space in that sense. And the lakes that are dwindling in number, the various issues around lakes, of course, are transformation of the ecological function to start with, and then you have conversion to their authorized and unauthorized encroachments and conversion to civic amenities sites by the local authorities. So the various issues around lakes too. So broadly, those are the public spaces that I refer to in my own research. And the research question is, what do the claims and conceptualizations of different actors of state and society to public space reveal about planning and governance in Indian cities? So the theoretical framework is basically space, society, and state, as I said. So I look at the right to the city as the ground-up approach that people might have to making claims of use value to space, because here we're talking about some claims that it's in the public realm, if you remember. So sometimes it's just my right to be in a space versus my legal right to be there. I don't have a certificate that says I can be there. And the master planning as the state's vision for the city, and public space, of course, as a space of democratic contestations and claims to the public realm. Again, very quickly, the public, this is how I define public space. These are the definitions that I evoke. The product of social relations which are most likely conflicting and unequal, and outside space versus inside space. That's a more Indian kind of theorization of public space, because and in the Indian context, it's seen as the other space outside the private, and therefore it doesn't belong to anyone and perhaps belongs to everyone, and that by the same token. And then formal planning processes, the master plan as a single text negotiating document is how Newman defines it, and it's also been described as an instrument of power and a tool of power that is used to kind of subdue space and society in the process. The right to the city, of course, is Henry Lefebvre invigorated that concept, and he calls it the cry and demand, a transformed and renewed right to urban life. And it's earned by living out the routines of everyday life in the space of the city. So there's this urging call to people to kind of occupy spaces and in that process make it their own and lay claim to it. So I looked at 3 different cases in Bangalore and I looked across 3 socioeconomic groups. My first case, so the 3 groups basically were a subaltern group and then a middle class environmental network, and the third was an elite neighborhood group in an affluent neighborhood of Bangalore, Kormangala. So my first case study is titled Private Claims to Public Space, Urban Renewal and Subaltern Politics on KR Road. So there was this community of bamboo basket weavers. That's a little orange stretch there, and it's in the old part of the city called KR Market area. And these people were there for more than 50 years or so. And the metro project was to come there, and they were given some notice by the local authorities. And after adequate notice, as the authorities saw it, the BBMP and the metro company basically evicted these people overnight. And what followed in the next few months was struggles, of course, from these from the evicted community side to reclaim that space on the grounds that they've been there for a very long time and they have rights to be there because that's where they've worked and that's where they have visibility. The BMRCL and BBMP on the other side claim that this is it's a public sidewalk and no one can really make claims to it. And there's always, in all these cases, there's this idea of the public interest, which makes it difficult to contest for the social actor too, right? Because the government says, I'm doing it in the public interest, and who can fight with that idea? So in the public interest, the metro is being made, the sidewalk is being narrowed, and so there were no claims that were valid from the KR Market weavers' sides. So BMRCL responded by offering resettlement housing, and when these people were actually asking for workspace. And so there was this gap between, the way I saw it, there's this gap between what's required and how policies address it there, you know. So there's a basic gap, and they were not asking for housing, but BMRCL said, and I think this happens across projects across the country where people are given housing out on the outskirts and places very far away from the dislocated communities' workspaces, and what follows is a reappropriation of those spaces from which they've been evicted, and so on, the battle continues. And what else comes out is the KR Market weavers tried to make claims to the space, talking about their rights as a community, a marginalized community that had a right to be there because of their work needs. And they tried to get declared as a slum. They used official processes basically to kind of make claims that they tried to get that stretch of sidewalk actually designated as a slum by the slum board. That didn't work either. So there was basically what comes out here is this gap between what's required and what's actually done. And state actors responded with a dual policy of appeasement and control of marginal groups via welfare schemes where land is promised but never secured, as Roy puts it. The second case was the efforts of an activism of an environmental network called Hasiru Usiru, which is still active in Bangalore. And it's a very amorphous kind of group that it's not an organization or a formal registered space. They come together whenever there's a need to protest against some kind of project or that kind of threatens the urban greens and the urban commons. And they came together in this case against the felling of trees across the city in a road widening project. And what started off as a spontaneous coming together became this group. And what's interesting about Hasiru Usiru is they kind of went to court against the BBMP and they protested this tree felling, and though they didn't have a registered official presence in that sense, the court actually mandated that BBMP should talk to these people and keep them posted about future tree felling projects. So to me, in thinking about in the backdrop of the idea of bourgeois environmentalism, Hasiru Usiru kind of presents a divergence or diversion from that particular way of looking at middle class politics or activism for the urban commons, because it presented as a more inclusive kind of way of looking. They're not looking to keep out other groups, but they're trying to kind of just keep the space alive and open to various groups. And that was what was interesting. And It also indicated that the middle class is not just one flat term. There's these variations and nuances within the urban middle class, which it serves as well to kind of examine when we are thinking about middle class studies. The third case, I'm sorry, I'm just overshooting. Just 2 minutes. The third case study was park politics and neighborhood activism. This was in Koramangala, as I said. There was the civic amenity site that was used as a playground for 20 years. And residents kind of assumed that finally it's going to become a park. But the BDA had other plans. In the next master plan, it kind of started slicing that civic amenity site into an eye hospital, a management school, a marriage hall, and various, which are actually public functions in one sense, quasi-public functions, and very much within their rights to actually convert to. But it was in a quiet neighborhood, and so these residents went to court against the BDA, and they won the case, which is quite an unprecedented victory and for civil society as they saw it. And it kind of questioned this whole idea in terms of how theory posits that elite groups have the ear and the support of official processes, and it kind of indicated that the politics on ground take precedence, because what happened next is, though they won the case, a couple of local residents encroached on that space to make a cricket academy, and they actually had to take the help of a local politician to evict those people. And then the politician decided how much of that would become a park and how much of it would be a playground. So it kind of brings up it kind of highlights the importance of local representatives and their dominance over local decisions about public resources versus master planning processes. So I think I've lost my last slide. Okay. The question again was, what do the claims and conceptualizations of different actors of society and state to public space reveal about planning and governance in Indian cities? Basically, it indicates that public streets, all these public spaces are shaped by local spatial practices. City residents make claims of use value to public space that collide with official planning policies and projects. Local struggles challenge official claims of public interest and rational planning with counterclaims rooted in local spatial histories and practices. And finally, state society engagement in grassroots fights for public space in Indian cities evolve in a very complex and unpredictable terrain of electoral and development politics. So what basically this underlines is more than master planning or ground up, it's not just a dominant single narrative that is governing how the city is shaped, but it's more of the politics of opportunity and opportunism that evolves through the interaction of these different actors in the city that the politics of public space emerges. Thank you.
I'm afraid we have time for just one question, if anybody wants to. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Uday Wagle. I'm an architect, master planner. I practice in Bangalore. And coincidentally, my master's thesis was on public space in Bangalore. So some of my observations were that, and also Janaki Nair has written extensively on these linguistic clashes during the 70s and 80s, particularly between Kannada nationalists and Tamil citizens of Bangalore, who had settled many generations ago. Do you still see those conflicts carrying on into the present day? Because I've been away for a long time, so my knowledge of Bangalore is a bit dated, number one. Number two, also, there was this trend of private space being used to some extent as public use, particularly on MG Road. Some of the buildings that came up in the 80s, you'll see, used to have a forecourt or a plaza or something like that. But I don't see that trend reaching its logical conclusion like it did in New York with Rockefeller Center and some of those other places. So I wonder whether you looked into that. And the third question is what happened in New Year's, over the New Year's celebrations. There are some conflicting reports. Some people say that it was people venting their frustration because they don't really have public communal space in the traditional sense where they feel welcome and they can use it. And also the logistical side of not having a large public gathering space, whether it's a Maidan or some other, waterfront, riverfront, for the masses to gather. So it becomes a logistical problem where everybody is, landing up on MG Road and Brigade Road for any sort of large public celebration. So your thoughts on these, please. The linguistic, and then the public-private space, or the private semi-public space, and then New Year's.
I actually, in my research, I did not. So in my research, I didn't really look at that particular typology as such, but broadly, I guess, and it kind of goes to the last question you asked. To the way I look at it, I haven't actually. I've also been away for a while since I finished my research, but then. The way I see it is, it's not the dearth of public space that is the issue. Because it's more of, I mean, as these examples show, many of them are not really planned public spaces beyond the parks and the playgrounds. So perhaps that's not so much the issue as the inclusivity of those spaces and who's allowed to get in there. And so women in this last New Year's case, New Year Eve's case was, it was kind of indicative that women are still not accepted in that realm at that time of the evening, a day, right? That's what came across. So it kind of goes back again in a certain way to who's included and who's not, and this is how society is kind of reflecting who they consider insiders and outsiders. In terms of the plazas in front of malls, I'm not really sure about that. I don't know if someone else wants to talk about it, but yeah, I mean, just going by, I don't go to malls myself. So, but yeah, there's a lot of, there are spaces I feel, in fact, the ones I know around my place, they do have those kinds of spaces at least for people to sit in Meenakshi Mall and Gopalan Mall. And I guess, and I do see a lot of people hanging out there. So in that sense, they do serve their purpose. And again, if you look at White's study for New York plazas, he also actually talks about certain plazas that work better than others. So maybe there's something to be said about the design of the plaza itself and where it's located, etc. And the linguistic issue, how it's played out in the public realm, I guess it's more of, I don't know how spatially it kind of translates in the city, but there's conversations about it. I don't know a whole lot about that though. Thanks.
Also, there's this whole case about unveiling of the statue of...
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
maybe
so
we
much.
can
Yeah.
take that later.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Salila. Now we have Dr. Shweta, please.
Is it working? Can you just speak again?
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, now it's working. Yeah, so I'm a postdoctoral fellow here at IHS, hosted at IHS and also at DPU, so I'm really benefiting of this wonderful partnership. And the research is sponsored by the Swiss National Science Foundation. So my presentation hinges actually pretty well on Salila, so I'm looking more at the planning issues, and I'm really interested in the democratic story behind peri-urbanization. So I myself am not a planner, so it is a journey for me really to learn how planning is going on in peri-urban space in Bangalore. So could I please have the...
Yeah.
So peri-urban areas are in the making, and it's the happening place now all over the world. And I pretty like this blue tin sheets, you know, because in a way there is a metaphor about how planning is going on, not to be seen, but behind these tin sheets, like digging and dismantling, everything is going on. So there are some statistics that India is the biggest contributor for the urban dwellers to come. And it's said by the UN that 45% of the world's population by 2020, so pretty soon, will be living in peri-urban areas. And it's projected that in Bangalore it will be 13.2 million inhabitants by 2050, so that's the UN. And the Bangalore master plan pegs it around 11 to 20 million, depending on what type of projections we're looking at. So we know something about the financial story behind peri-urbanization. So there's Goldman, who has written extensively about it and also has termed the term speculative urbanism. And there's also Halbert and Rouanet, publication 2014, who talk about trans-scalar territorial networks to explain how capital landing happens in peri-urban areas and how also acts are amended so that there is rapid capital entry, but also rapid capital exit at the most profitable moments, and how these deals, especially infrastructure projects, are really done behind a closed door. So we have a sense about the financial story, so things have come out on that. We also have a sense of the technical story behind peri-urban planning, so I'm learning about it currently. So there are all these instruments that yesterday Mr. Malhotra was talking about, and also about the loopholes in decentralization processes that Mercier and Mohan talk about in a publication in 2012. So my interest is really the democratic story. So what are the conditions, what are the scopes, the formal arenas where now rural citizens can engage in the co-shaping of the urban environment that is emerging in the peri-urban areas. So the city is actually coming to them. We spoke about migration yesterday, but in these neighboring areas, the city is coming to them. So how can they co-shape this emerging environment? That is the question I'm interested in. So again, so what is the access to information? So citizenship can be only exercised if one has access to information, knowledge about what is in plan, in store for these areas, what are the formal rights, and how can we make sense of peri-urban citizenship? Like, at least in cities, my sense is that you know the target, you know what ward, you probably know what who the councillor is, and there are also a certain structure of what we call civil society to engage in activism. So what is the scene really in peri-urban areas with still rural societal structures, but with urban aspirations, and also a fragmented institutional space? So is there, in that sense, a scope to conceive a right to a city yet to come? So what are the conditions to maybe conceive such a notion of a city yet to come? I will not elaborate more on Lefebvre's right to the city. We heard from Salila very well. And of course, there are particular challenges in the peri-urban context. So these areas are not yet classified. The administrative classification is still rural. So the mechanisms with the Gram Panchayat are still rural. But the processes, the governing processes, all infrastructure decisions are all projected for an urban space. Of course, it's a big institutional bricolage in peri-urban spaces. So there is a layering of planning going on. There is the planning conurbations known as from the revenue maps. Then there is the local planning area maps. Then there is a structure plan for the BMRDA. And also these areas are part of different districts. So there's this layering of planning going on. And of course, peri-urbanization announces itself with land conversion from rural to, from agricultural land to then residential, commercial, and other uses. So what has been helpful in conceptualizing or to try to read these processes has been Massey's publication 1996, Politics and Space and Time. So she in a way says that space and time are co-constitutive of these processes. So I tried to graphically depict this the way I understand it. So space is a container, but also where time actually brings all the dynamism in the processes that happens in these spaces. But she also says that social networks constitute space. What I would like then to add is the timing of information, of who gets access to what information at what time, that also kind of constitute these networks that then have influence on how the space is constituted. So really have much more closer reading of this co-constitution along with the timing of information is kind of a reading that I have found useful until now. So this is really a work in progress, and I'm very happy if you have some comments and inputs for me later on. So what I've been looking at is this Kanakpura Local Planning Authority, which is at the southwestern periphery of Bangalore. So it is constituted as a local planning area. And I'm particularly focusing on the village called Kagalipura, the immediate, so this is the first segment. You can see there that red square, the first segment of this longish LPA. And as you see, the land use planning is such that most of it will be residential. So it's mainly yellow, and partly here on the western side with some semi-public and public functions, and very little industrial and commercial spaces foreseen for this area. So I'll start with little anecdotes of my fieldwork to also depict how information is really crucial. So I got the contact from the assistant director of the LPA and visited him in Kanakpura. I was struck that unfortunately I missed to take a photograph then. So I was struck that this LPA office was not at the beginning of the village main, this town municipal main road where all the other government offices are, with the police station, the Gram. So all of these corporations, they're all at the beginning of the village, except the LPA office was more in the inside of the village beside the Rangaswamy temple. And it was just a house without a banner. Anyone I asked on the street where it was hardly knew it. Only one person who had a small shop said, there where they draw maps, is it that place? And he showed me to that. So it was totally invisible in the public space. Then from him, I got the contact to the private planning company who did the local plans for this LPA, for this Kanakpura, and tried to visit them. So this is their office here. So on their website, the address is an office in Gandhinagar. And when I called, so the person I had to meet said, though, come and meet me in Vijayanagar. So the office address, though, was in Gandhinagar. So I was a bit confused because I did not have the address of the Vijayanagar office. So when I called there, I said, yes, could I please could I please have the phone number of the Vijayanagar office? But then the person said, no, you are at the Vijayanagar office. And then that person insisted that she will not send me the address in a written form by mail or SMS, but they had to note it down when she orally told me. So finally, I landed up here. In this plaza, there is this office. Again, without any banner, you have to find your way through. And I was also pretty struck how the reception space and the working space was separated through a security system which required thumbprints. So really to depict how information, again, is securely guarded behind these security systems. So there, I had a rather politically correct interview with a planner who was involved in the planning authority. Just let me. So I took 3 narratives. Let me that I don't. So they did the surveying, the data gathering and everything, and they were also involved in formulating of the structure plan. So what was also striking is that the master plan for the LPA has just recently been approved and has come out in the public domain, whereas the final approved structure plan of the BMRDA is not yet out. And them having been involved in all these processes, they were saying we are really stuck because the structure plan really articulates the population projections between core and periphery, but we don't know what the final approval is, so we are a little bit stuck. So again, here the timing and the manipulation through time when what is approved and the non-coherence again kind of makes space for speculation and for other manipulative action. So the town plan, so I did an analysis, of course, also of the Town Planning Act, and there is no, it doesn't talk to 74th Amendment. There is also no indication of how much time each planning process should take. So they did, of course, the consultation of 60 days when the people can give in their comments. And especially for the Anikal and Hoskote, they had more than 3,000 comments, and most of them were really requests to change the land conversion to commercial or industrial or residential and not a semi-public. So their main concern, she really stated over and over again that we are the technical assistants to the government and only kind of contended the delays and that there's no common GIS database. And I also learned from an intern that then left this company that there was then a second level of outsourcing. So the first level is from the government to this private company, and the second level is really to another company which was doing this surveying especially, and which compromised pretty much on quality in his view. So then I also spoke to a real estate agent who is now a consultant. Yeah, I'll be a bit quick. So there again, the main lessons for me were, of course, the entire business is very speculative, that among in 6 years that the land value can increase about by 3 to 5 times, and that the whole game is really done during the land conversion, and that they have to hurry to know where the upcoming projects are coming so that they can buy up land before a land conversion. And here the sketch really explains how this buying up of the land ops functions, where the broker, really being an internal to the communities, really knows the family disputes and the kin disputes and all of that to approach these people and kind of come with white collars, a lot of money, and propose them to buy up land. So that is almost like a dispute pacification, and then he buys up like chunks by chunks wherever it's possible. So that's why also you have these non-contiguous plots sometimes. So, and he says now it's less of coercive powers, but more of white collar, bargaining for land. So I also spoke to the panchayati. So this is the first place where actually there's a banner of what the place is. And here it was, I was there about 1.5 hours, and 3 parties came saying, yes, I need the kata, this document, I am Purvanka Hayat, flat number 601, the next party came, I am Brigade Meadows, I'm flat number this and that. So they see their role really also in execution of things, in making documents ready for all these upcoming projects. And so this is the Panchayat office, and this is maybe the posters you have seen, Live the 60 Acres Life, really. So the greenfield projects, this is Brigade Meadows coming up there, and this is the layout. So they don't have any approval rights. Actually, since 1994, they don't have any approval rights, so that is really done by the LPA and the BMRDA. But now, recently, there is a government order where they can engage in approving the layouts, but no capacity has been built for that. So LPA means that it's really an area to prepare a master plan, and I was also struck to see that they said, but this is fine, because if all these projects come up, then everybody has business. So it's really turning the inhabitant not as a consumer of services or really a citizen to claim entitlements, but their narrative was really that they are turning this area into entrepreneurial area where the rural inhabitants become entrepreneurial. So it's really entrepreneurial city from the bottom up. Now. And the structure of farming there, the Panchayati people also said that there is land loss, but people kind of invite it because they have land, and because they hire labor, they make debts to finance these labor, and that's how they actually want money then as for quick fixes. So I still have to go and talk to the farmers and the people living there. So I'm calling it initial insights and non-conclusion because it's still going on. So there's really this, in space terms, there is really this controversy between planning conurbation as space and then the electoral constituency. What power do they really have to co-shape these places? And also the land conversion network. So all these brokers, the real estate people, and all who kind of define the projection of what is going to be with this land. So there is also great potential for manipulation through access of information and through what time this information comes through delays of approval, disclosure, and incoherences between these timelines. And it's also striking how every interlocutor has really this hands-off approach. So this is my job, I only do this, and they do that, and I really don't care. So there is really plenty of scope for this land conversion network to come in. Okay, I'll really hurry up, sorry. And again, there is also striking the importance of skill to network these assets. And really, as for now, I'm a bit frustrated as a sociologist that I've not seen too much of conflict between planning democracy, because they really don't talk to each other in terms of acts or also in terms of action, the way I spoke to my interlocutors. And I'm wondering how to call these peri-urban areas, because in the literature, very often these areas are picked in terms of a conflicting sampling. Wherever there's an issue, you sample those areas. But this is a very ordinary peri-urban area. Can we call it ordinary? Can we call it maybe co-opted a peri-urban area into the development narrative that the government is pushing? And who is the rural inhabitant? So is he a citizen with entitlements? Is he a consumer of access, of service provision? Or is he really this entrepreneur? I would like to stress that there's this need to recognize the structure of civil society in the rural areas, in peri-urban areas. They might be very different from the city. And whoever is in this planning profession, public or private, it's striking how they see themselves just as executors of these higher forces, which nobody is able to really pinpoint. And there are certain anachronisms that I also find interesting. I'll end on this. So as Chatterjee says, in India there is territorial administration which predates democracy, and Bhaduri says democracy predates urbanization. And also in terms of Northwest, plans happen here after acute demand and not really to plan adequate supply for projected demand. And there is this disconjunction between the areas classified in the Indian Census and the Municipal Corporation Act and the Karnataka Town Planning Act. And as I also point out, this incoherence between timing of structure plan and LPA master plans and their approvals. And timing, I really is striking and is emerging as a manipulation to really avoid this democratic exercise and really render a potential right to the city yet to come pretty void, actually, until now. Thank you.
So we have 5 minutes, right?
We have time for 2 questions, and then we can open up for a much more general discussion. So 2 questions for Shweta.
Hi, it was a really nice presentation. So my idea is when you're studying this kind of bureaucracy, and I take from Akhil Gupta's study of the development bureaucracy, I just a very short point. In a context where there's such a information asymmetry or there's a lack of information, do the peri-urban residents then prefer to approach politicians instead of bureaucrats to kind of take a shortcut through this, through this paperwork jumble? So that would be like my crisp question.
Thank you.
You can introduce yourself. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Pratik. I'm from Terry University. Yeah.
Hi Shweta, great presentation and fantastic anecdote. I think that is kind of almost emblematic of how things are done here. But I was wondering, have you done some sort of a matrix or a graph connecting all these various agencies? Because Bangalore probably has like almost 24, maybe 15 to 20 various, from BMRDA to BBMP to, and there has been so much that has been written, and so many commissions or whatever, study groups, like the BATF and all sorts of agencies, some constitutional, some not, that have been put together over time. What is the relationships? Because at some point my understanding was these were all going to come under one umbrella group, which was the BMRDA. But that I don't think that ever happened. So it'd be interesting to just understand the dynamics between all of this, including some of the utilitarian ones like BESCOM, and they seem to be all moving in different trajectories. Some of them are quite up to date. In terms of the GIS data, I think BWSSB has a pretty good GIS data set, but some of the others don't.
If you could just respond to that, please. Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. So regarding the first one, so if you talk to a planner, he said, I interact with planning and with bureaucrats and with politicians and bureaucrats, and politicians are much more rapid, right? Because they have these 5 years term, so they want to showcase whatever work they have done for the next election. So if for planners, they apparently like to interact with politicians. And when I asked the questions as well to the Gram Panchayat, they said, yeah, all these sanghas and all these discussions, they really arise during election time, but otherwise it's pretty quiet. And it was really, I spoke to 2-3 people at the Gram Panchayat, and the canon was like, yeah, this is a good thing happening, all this urbanization coming up, because it really induces business. So that was the main narrative. And again, politicians in terms of planning, if at all, what I heard through my interviews is really getting roads and access networks done for their constituencies in these peri-urban areas. These were like the main concerns that were raised. I hope it satisfies your question. Yeah. About this jungle, yeah. So I don't have the overview of it. I wished I could draw such a graph. I think there are efforts. There are people who have done that, and one would have to kind of pull it together for peri-urban areas. There is some graphs in the structure plan and some in the local plan, especially in the structure plan. But that also is not entirely making sense to me. And of course, so the publication of Amogh and Mercier, they speak about it as well, like which agencies actually are working towards it, which are really hollowed out because decentralization is not really happening. But there are also some positive initiatives happening. So there apparently WRI, they are engaging in talks with the Karnataka Town Planning Department to revise the act. So at least there is some consciousness that, you know, the act has to move forward and has to be modernized. And also there is an initiative to create a Karnataka GIS base. So that is something that is really needed, because all of these agencies, all what you mentioned, which are scattered, they all have their GIS base, and these planning companies, their hardest task is really to get everybody's data in to one layered GIS space then to plan these LPAs. So that initiative is there apparently with the government to centralize the GIS space, but it is a difficult one. Say cooperation doesn't come easy by. And about this institutional fragmentation, there is a book edited by Adrian Allen and others who really put this to the point that this institutional fragmentation in peri-urban areas is here to stay, so that you have to deal with it, and they call it untamed urbanism. So probably, you know, their prediction is that it's here to stay and we'll have to deal with it.
Thank you. So we have about 10 to 12 minutes for discussions. I know there were some questions which were raised earlier, so if you want to start with that, and then are there more questions as well for the entire panel? Okay. No. So let's just start with you, sir, and then.
Please introduce yourself.
Sure. Hi, my name is Amitabh. So this is for Yamini and Prashant. I'll first ground my question and then perhaps ask it. Street art as a term and a phenomena in that sense is coming from the post-graffiti movement. For a post-graffiti movement, it's necessary, I'd assume, to have a graffiti movement. Both are completely absent in our cultural context. Being a practitioner myself, a graffiti as an activity of tagging or marking, it may be present in the initial moments when it began in Delhi in 2010, 2011. But other than Daku or other practitioners, a graffiti as a function doesn't have any meaning. So I would want to challenge, or want to understand better what you mean by street art, because as per my understanding, it's a hollow and a vacuous term. I also would like to understand what the tensions between these utopian visions of art, place and person are in trying to unravel what we understand by street art. And what are we trying to excavate, and what are our tools for that excavation or that exploration? Where are we trying to excavate art and place through person, or are we trying to understand relationship between place and person through art, or are we witness to this endless cycle of one ricocheting from the other, so place bounces through person through art, and it's just this narrative of, now well-known narrative of shifting goalposts in that sense. So I just want to get some sense of clarity that your research might point us to. So yeah.
Can we just take two more questions and then we can skip that?
Yeah, fascinating panel, thank you. Question for Yamini and Prashant. Is unclaimed graffiti work, is it legal? Is it ever policed, contained by law? If it is policed, when is it policed? If it isn't policed, is it because it is always legal?
Hi, I'm Nirali. So thank you for the presentations, all of you. It's nice that located out of Bangalore, we've discussed the political and transgressive substance of art. We've discussed the relevance of planning practices. We've discussed categories of, questioning the categories of peri-urbanization. And I would want to encourage all of you, and even maybe the organizers of the panel, to look at Bangalore again through these kind of discussions and why we've come together to discuss it. Just that, actually.
Hi, this is for the first two presentations regarding art. I just wanted to know, all these efforts have been from the artist side. Is there any way to judge how people are responding to it, and what is their perception of all these interventions that is happening in the city? And second question is for ma'am who presented on the public spaces. So I would want to ask, like, see, the city is getting new movement systems and metros. So for example, the metro entrance is a good informal kind of public space that is kind of created because of the new intervention in the city. So is there any policy intervention which is kind of possible? So suppose we integrate this with the vendor policy and we allot spaces within the DMRC entrance where both can work together, and so they find livelihood, and at the same time it contributes to the art and the livelihood promotion. Now, and same way with the new movement and cycle, bike tracks coming in, and new master plan kind of accommodated it. Can it? So can the sidewalks have spaces with the vendors so that this gap between people not able to claim space can be bridged? So do you think these new new interventions and things can be used as means to bridge this gap?
Okay, sorry, if you can just respond to these, we'll take another round after that. Thank you. Yamini, do you want to start?
Yeah. Okay. The absence of graffiti movement, and then what do you mean by street art? Is precisely, I thought the intention of a presentation was to point to that. In spite of we can't say that there is no gentrification, and we can't say that there isn't this spatial discrimination amongst the communities based on either class or caste. But if there isn't, so what is the, how do we then locate whatever writings we find on the streets, because it is not occupying space? And the street art, that's what we were saying, that the absence of graffiti movement is what brings street art to locate itself in the global context more than the local context. And this question of art, place and person, I think is a very interesting thing to think about. I wanted to emphasize on the choice of the space, and also the focus was not so much on coming from a practitioner. I understand, as she was putting, it was a very interesting dialogue between the first two papers when she was bringing the perspective of what all negotiations you undergo through and how do you negotiate with it. But as we were pointing out, we were trying to point out the politics of the choice of the space, and also because it involves the state in it, and why is it that there are certain spaces which are want to be sanitized, and why certain spaces are not. And also what is the kind, like for example, bringing in the point which I was trying to make in the context of Delhi, bringing Sanchita Dasgupta's piece on Delhi. She talks about how the street art organization itself, she finds that its aesthetics, like another gentleman was pointing out, it doesn't try to, he was standing there, it doesn't try to engage with the local at all. And she also had something to point out, saying that because, very funnily, all of them had lotus in it. So there is also that kind of politics which is there, talking about Delhi. So it's the institutionalization, what does it do to the art? What are the restrictions that it places on the individual? Can I then go and say, BBMP, no, this is, in a space provided by BBMP itself, and if I want to, what are the negotiations that you have to do? So those are the aspects which we try to bring out. I hope it answers.
See, another thing is putting it in context of the evolution of the global movement, in terms of the response and the rebellion, or whatever it started with in terms of graffiti, reclaiming of space, tagging, reclaiming of that space by people who are marginalized, then getting it institutionalized in some way. And then there are certain rock stars of graffiti emerging, like Bansky and all that. So we enter into that space fairly towards the later part of that evolution, from when we are looking at it from our perspective, and in some ways when graffiti itself is being engaged with the city. So like Yamini was mentioning, in the absence of that kind of a graffiti, like you mentioned, the response, then those spaces are getting occupied by institutionalized entry of art. in the space which graffiti probably could have occupied. So we have then institutionalized events like Indian street art, etc., which actually comes, and many of those artists are not from this place context, but sort of imagining that context or integrating that context into their work and making that expression, and maybe thereby exploring what was behind in this context. But a lot of them are actually from outside the place and context.
Also this aspect of, so there's this entire rhetoric of what does BPMP want to do, like the initial phase when it was painting the walls with all kinds of messages, say, citizen-centered, or what they call as patriotic and messages. So the way we would look at that versus the way we would look at something which is a artist performing. So the question of then that was executed through tender. So how do we call that art at all? And if not, then what do we call, what is this question of who's an artist versus a craftsman, the institution and the way it's executed? These are all the complexities I think one needs to note also when one is evaluating, because again the question of art, place and person is not isolated from the politics of the institution itself, was something I wanted to talk about. And the other, the unclaimed graffiti, is it legal? Is it policed? So like we said, we were talking about, I briefly showed, the way we were trying to define unclaimed is that there is no claim to who's made it and who's done it. So is it policed? Interestingly, it is not, in the sense that there is no there is no strict, though there has been like some act somewhere saying no vandalism, but it's never put into practice. But in spite of that, if we do not see, not that we do not have problems, like he was pointing out, there is no graffiti movement here. So why is that so? Is something with it, I obviously do not have an answer, but it tells us something about the nature of public space itself. And why isn't there a dissent in spite of no policing? Is it because there is no policing that there is no dissent, or is the policing done in some other way? So that's something I'd want to reflect on. And how do you judge people's perception? I think that's an important question, but in this study we haven't gone exploring how in terms of, neither in terms of talking to the people, or it was mostly like an observational study, and I can only give anecdotes, but I cannot comment anything concretely as to how does the community around engage with it. So yeah, I think that's some research to be done.
If you have any responses.
I just actually am going to take some of the framings and just open them up a little bit, if that's okay. So I think that this idea of policing is interesting, because we are talking about a public space that functions very differently in India, but we're referencing the West. And right now what is being policed is postering. That's being policed. And it's very interesting to think about how artists are engaging with postering, street artists that are engaging and playing with this idea as well. So I think that what is happening to me, or what seems to be interesting, is this idea of research and practice, and how research pushes practice and how practice pushes research. And within that context, what point in time, where are we looking at it from? Are we looking at it from a sociological lens? Are we looking at it as the function of art, what art functions as, and whose perspective it is on what art functions at? So I think that it's about opening up that conversation, and I think that there is an attempt to have an interdisciplinary panel partly for that kind of idea. I think that your question about opening up these spaces that are private or government-based spaces for public space, and connected to her idea about street vendors and things like that, I think that for me, it's really a question about, is there a potential for speculative policy? Where, right now, in your panel, you really brought up this idea of the co-option of the development narrative in in a direct contrast to democracy. And what's interesting about when one develops policy, it's always, I feel it's always retroactive. And as opposed to future thinking, where diversity becomes a stake in policy, and one has to keep checking for that, or the ability to check for that. And is there a potential for future thinking policy around public space versus retroactive policy development around public space?
Thanks for your question. From what I understood, you're asking if the new policy, I mean, these are new opportunities when you have the metro entrance and you have new sidewalks being designed and built. There would be ideally perhaps new opportunities to kind of integrate formerly marginalized or sectors of population or economies. But it gets a little more complex than that, in the sense that, yes, it would be an opportunity if there were the right conversations happening, first of all, but then all these complexities of legal, illegal, and formal, informal, and use value versus exchange value come into play. And what happens in the case, if you think of examples such as the BDA complexes that are being built to replace markets, traditional markets, etc., there's this mismatch in the perception. So if you talk about Lefebvre's spatial triad, you have the perceived and the conceived space, etc. And there's a mismatch between how space is being developed, how the government sees public space versus how people use it. And when this entire idea of encroachment, when you look at street vending as an encroachment versus just a segment of society kind of making a livelihood and meeting their basic needs, there's a problem right there, you know. So yes, in an ideal world, yes, it would be great. And I think that it's been tried in places in Ahmedabad, if I'm right, there's spaces for hawkers, designated spaces. I'm not sure how well they work. And the other thing is, it's not entirely illegal. There are licenses given to hawkers, but it's a very I think it's just a small proportion of the people that are actually vending on the streets. And from what I understand several times, yes, they are even given place on streets, but not on streets where they'd have visibility, because these visible spaces are spaces of great premium for other activities too, and you can actually get rent out of those perhaps. So they'd be, kind of moved to side streets where no one would see them, and their entire purpose of being on the streets is kind of lost. So there's all these different issues around actually, but yeah, ideally that should be what you said.
Yeah, maybe to respond, re-reflect on Bangalore. I think talking about co-option of development narratives and also referencing, I think in terms of a democratic practice of planning, there's also scope to kind of reference from other cities to see how people are engaging to counter this planning practice. So I've seen in Surat that people have actually, farmers have gone to court against the authority, saying that there is a designated, like the Metropolitan Planning Committee, there's a counterpart like that in Gujarat, that they should be doing it, and there also it's dysfunctional. Against again, authorities have been going to to court in Mumbai against the Mumbai Metropolitan Development Authority, and Nasik we were discussing yesterday. So I think there is also referencing to be done, not only in terms of vision, like Shanghai, Singapore, or the West or something, but also democratic practice against top-down planning to be referenced. And in terms of future policy, I mean, I think in some Scandinavian country, I don't exactly remember where, they have a ministry for future issues. I think that would be actually a very good idea.
We'll go for another 2 questions, right? Yeah.
We can take 2 more questions, and I think you have a question as well. So we'll just take those 3 together. Yeah.
Hello, my name is Shreyas, and my questions for Salila and Shweta. I was wondering what role caste plays in public space and the urban, as well as the land question in the urban, because the 2 important ways that caste was asserted in rural spaces was through access to public areas and access to land and land usage. So when I think of the example of the basket weavers in Krishna Rajendra Market, I would be hard pressed to think, it would be absurd to think that the Kote Venkateshwara temple could be leveled in the same way as the basket weavers were evicted. And that is also a caste question implicit in that weavers that belong to a specific community. And in the same way, in Shweta's paper, the peri-urban areas are places where land is owned by very specific caste communities. So I was wondering how that dynamic plays into the kind of questions you're asking.
So I just wanted to ask largely the first two panelists about this question of graffiti and street art. To some extent, to me, and it's maybe a naive way of looking at it, it seems to be a very Western worlded view of art. Both of us were just talking about this. In the Indian context of city, you see so much popular art, you see religious art, you see in the village, villages, you see different kinds of art in front of houses. Does that not fall within the idea of graffiti, street art? And again, in terms of perspective of the West versus North versus South, West versus East, how do you look at it?
Jayaraj, your question.
Yeah, I have a question. I'm taking.
Okay.
It works, yeah? Yeah. Nirali's point on Bangalore, I think with one of you touched on the fact that, we have this conference, as I said, on Bangalore, not just because Outlook said that it's a hotbed of researchers, nor because we are only located in Bangalore, but also there is this larger interest all of us have is to think about how does specific geographies contribute or transform knowledge? Is it knowledge resultant, how is this particular place? So it's quite useful to see, think about Bangalore, Pete too. Right now the latest report is Bangalore is an unlivable city. Wherever I go, this ask, oh, Bangalore is unlivable, is it true? Like, I don't know, I'm living here. Or the next future city of Coimbatore coming up, right? And the thing is that has gone through the specific transition, all that, Bangalore was not in the scene at all 50 years ago of urbanization. So, is there anything specific that studying Bangalore has told or informed us about, or your practices on pedagogy and so on and so forth? Is there something specific and unique that studying Bangalore really made it to make you frustrated about knowledge in general and then specific knowledges, or you get what I'm trying to say, right? The specificity of epistemology.
The Bangalore School of Urbanism.
No. Is Bangalore, has studying Bangalore really, or practice in Bangalore really made anything specific understanding about the insufficiencies of the larger frames that you've been using?
Salila, I believe the first question was also addressed to you, so if you could just respond.
That was Shreyas's question.
Yeah.
Thanks for the question. So, a couple of things, I guess. Which side of the boundary wall the land use was kind of, the people were, so the basket weavers were on the sidewalk, the public sidewalk, and the temple, I'm assuming, is on private land. So there, in that sense, maybe they were more protected than the weavers themselves. But yeah, caste played an important role in a different manner, though. It kind of just the opposite. It kind of helped keep their hold on that sidewalk for so long. So they had this leader that is known across the city and beyond. And the way his organization works is they just put up their boards at both ends of the sidewalk, and that's about it. It's like their protective talisman. And anyone that tries to touch the community that's occupying that public space is not going to see good days ahead. So in that sense, yes, caste played a very important role in that particular case, but it helped to protect these weavers from being evicted when they came back later on. And so I'm not, and the other part, as I said, perhaps it's just that the government always had the argument that it's the public realm and you have no right to be actually occupying that space. Yeah.
Could you also respond to Jayaraj's question, and then we can go to, okay.
I think that, so I'm going to kind of loop your question into Jayaraj's question. But so I think that there's a couple of things. One is citizen activism is ripe and complicated within this city. And there is agency that comes from that. Is that agency different at class levels? That's a question I don't know the answer to. I'm sure research has been done about that. But the opportunity where there is differing visions for the future of the city, for again, future thinking dialogue to be engaged with now. across different groups is my particular interest in Bangalore. I think that the question that you brought up, which I think plays into this idea of this future thinking dialogue, is this larger aesthetic that exists differently across class lines, and it's connected to your space as well, where we are engaged. There is this wave. It's coming. It's on us. So where do you position yourself within the wave? How do you choose to position yourself? Do you go like this and say, I don't want to deal with you? Or do you stand up and say, yes, we're going to grab you and pull you down and give you a Bangalore context, which is what we did with the street art. We knew they were coming to Bangalore. So we were like, okay, do we let them come to Bangalore on their own? Do we say, no, come to Bangalore and we will partner with you so that we can lay some frames for your engagement with Bangalore? And, how do you engage? What is the way that you engage with the wave? I guess that becomes my question. And again, the potential for a future planning, because there is an active citizenry, whether they're all pushing each other out, and how do we move from a stagnation that comes up from the active citizenry to a potential leveraging of that?
Just switch it. I think it's off. Yeah.
This was one thing we were concerned about, saying how do we take the existing categories or of definitions of graffiti and street art and go about understanding Bangalore in that context, or do we look at Bangalore, start from Bangalore and then see how we can place it. And see, that is the precise reason why we call it reading the streets of Bangalore and not graffiti and street art. Though I contextualize, because the larger understanding of public writings or public art comes from the Western context, so I try to contextualize it. But you're very right in pointing out that what about the religious writings? And hence, we've tried to, this distinction between the claimed art and unclaimed art, or the commissioned art. So the religious writings also falls under the commission, because there is a particular agenda which we can right away read, and there's a claim to it. Because, for example, the outer walls of several temples are painted, so the temple lays claim right away to the art. So there is a clear trajectory you can trace, whereas the others, which probably you might not. So that is the distinction which we try to address, this aspect of how do we address the other art which is so prevalent here versus graffiti and street art, and hence we tried not to use existing categories. So that's how we dealt with it, and trying to, yeah.
See, if you look at it from that way, from the time of the cave paintings onwards, there is people who have expressed their thing in public spaces, right? So I think the question which came from that side, I forgot who, was about how was the public response to, and did we gauge that, or did we actually study that? And our answer was no. But I think in a way the public response gives a context to this whole movement. So when graffiti came into the limelight or started getting noticed, it was also because of the response from the public and the civic authorities to eliminate that. And then there is a sort of a spiral which then becomes, the whole thing becomes even more and more, and then there is a tension which is generated, and there is a strength which sort of is drawn from that tension, and then it becomes more visible, more controversial, more things are being talked about it. So from that context, if you look at the older thing, and because there is no contestation, there is no, there is no policing, there is no, one of the anecdotal thing which we read in one paper was that in the New York City, I think, and I forgot the year now, it was such a big problem, the mayor actually wanted to pass a law banning aerosol cans. And this is a country which doesn't ban, guns, right? So the societal response to graffiti, or the governance response to graffiti, was so intense. And hence it also gives it strength and this thing too. And that is probably what is lacking in Bangalore in a way, or in Indian cities, right? Somebody asked about vandalism, and it is, while it is vandalism, it is not strongly responded to. It is not criminally responded to, right? So I think, so it also then lacks that power, which can also be derived from the tension of conflict.
I'm trying to, like she was saying, your question directly, talks about what Jayaraj was talking about, in the sense that can we take the existing categories and directly apply, or do we need to rethink it in Bangalore? And I think definitely each one of us has to rethink it in the local context, because there's several the nuances are completely different, and yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say? Oh, okay, you have a response. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, I would like to respond to Shreya's question. I think it's a very important one, because I think no story in India can be told without considering caste. And I didn't talk about it because I'm not yet there in my research. So I did ask for the caste composition of the village and everything. I just got, the percentage of SC, ST. So SC was 20%, ST 3%. But of course, that doesn't tell us enough about it. And I'm finding it interesting to think about caste with this narrative of the entrepreneurial rural inhabitant, through this brigade projects and all come up. Of course, one future occupation of them might be perpetuating caste in terms, all the domestic workers and all of this labor needed. But if you think of entrepreneurialism, is it then an opportunity for them to break away from their traditional occupation to build a business successful, because just because of the need, there's nothing else there. They have to build up grocery stores and all of that. So it also, in terms of opportunity, peri-urbanization, it could be interesting to think about. Also, in the same wave, to talk about different visions, I think it's one challenge is, of course, to formulate visions and get engagement to formulate visions. But the other challenge is, again, to kind of bridge these divide. May you call it political civil society, caste, elite, class, whatever. I think these split public cultural spheres are very demarcated. And when you're talking about visions for the city, how do you engage and how do you really bridge these two spheres, I think is even the greater challenge. And to maybe respond to Jayaraj, I think Bangalore is, of course, one of other cities, but with very, very characteristic different scales of circuits. Like, the global financial circuits, then the business older communities, which are also well established and are now corresponding to a different scale of circuits, then the artisans. So all these scales are, I think, pretty pronounced, which makes it interesting lab to research. And also in terms of urban form, because Bangalore is on a plateau, I think it's also an interesting lab to see how boundaries just in the urban form and urban expansions are happening. And in these terms of scales and expansion also, what actors are dialoguing, are they visible, to whom are they visible, to whom are they invisible, where do they manifest themselves? I think these are all interesting aspects to certainly research in Bangalore.
Thank you very much. It was really interesting. I mean, we can go on, but I think in the interest of lunch, we should break up right now. So thank you all. I mean, I found it a really fascinating panel, and I'm sure Jayaraj did as well. I believe Vikas has some announcement to make before we just break for lunch. Thank you.
So I just wanted to let you guys actually just reiterate from yesterday that we have an art exhibition going on. It's called Art, City and Transition. We have the artists in audience. Zubeni Lota is here today. We have Pradeep Saha as well, and Usha Rao, who's I think over there. So do interact with the artists. They will be on a panel this evening. They will talk about their work and its connections to research and the urban. The other announcement I wanted to make was about lunch. So lunch is open. It's open to presenters, IHS internal folk, and fellows here at IHS. For the other guests, we have helpful information at the registration desk about local area eateries. So thank you so much.
So let's thank the panelists and thanks all of you.